So I'm titling this Undue Influence, Cults and Predators, and the terminology of undue influence is really a legal term for somebody exploiting somebody else. And there are destructive cults, but then there are also controlling people.
Evaluating the unhealthy belief system in cults. Cults can be religious or atheistic. Cults can be political or business-based. They can involve spiritual beliefs or beliefs about health or money. They can focus on meditation, politics, exercise, sex, or multi-level marketing. Cults can be as large as countries like North Korea or Soviet Russia, or as small as an abusive relationship between two people. The following checklist can help you identify whether a belief system is healthy, hope-filled, and supportive, or controlling, perfectionistic, and dehumanizing. Healthy groups with an open belief system encourage critical thinking, debate, and individuality. Unhealthy cultic groups use their toxic belief system as a form of control and don't allow any questioning. If you're involved in any group with a cultic belief system, you can use this checklist. Place a check mark by any of the following statements that are true for your group or relationship. The group's sense of purpose is intense and urgent. The belief system is rigid, righteous, and exclusive. Other beliefs are criticized or ridiculed. Members are expected to become perfect true believers. There is no room for doubt. The belief system is elitist. It is the only true path and the ultimate solution. The belief system promotes specific and demanding tools, practices, and rules, and has a structure that converts members into perfect followers. Members endure extensive indoctrination sessions through Bible lessons, political training, recruitment training, self-awareness lessons, meditation, criticism session, group rituals, study and lectures, punishments, and so forth. The belief system is perfectionistic with all or nothing requirements that must be followed to the letter. Members are rewarded for subordinating themselves utterly and or shedding their previous identities, family, job, home, finances, name, etc. The group is strongly hierarchical, with an inner circle of true believers who have special access, power, and privileges. Members are expected to contribute their money, their time, their resources, and their labor to the group in order to be seen as serious and loyal followers. The belief system is transmitted personally by the leader, who cannot be questioned. If the leader is deceased, this may be done through writings, videos, and or audio tapes, as well as by top leaders' testimonials. The group creates internal and external enemies, who were portrayed as threatening the very survival of the group. Members who question, break the rules, or leave are shunned or demonized and may lose all contact with group members, including their own family members. If you checked yes to one or more of these statements, your group or relationship may be under the influence of a controlling and unhealthy belief system. However, this doesn't mean that your group is dangerous, and it doesn't mean that it's a cult. If you are not sure, you can compare it to this list of a healthy belief system. Members have the right to question, to doubt, and to think their own thoughts. The belief system makes room for other beliefs and other ideas. Members are treated as equals and are not expected to be subordinate or perfectionistic. The belief system allows for personal autonomy, dignity, and freedom. Members retain their identities, finances, relationships, personal time, and private lives. The belief system includes rather than excludes people and ideas. Members can leave without being shunned or forced to abandon their friends and family. The belief system opens members to the world rather than isolating or segregating them from it. When a belief system is healthy, people have choices. When it is not, their choices get tangled up with the group's rigid vision of perfectionism and purity. We all experienced the chronic terror and powerlessness of living in closed environments where the leader's control was absolute and where the group dictated often the most mundane details of daily life. Wrenching ourselves out of these systems, we count as among the most difficult and bravest acts we have each had to do.
So if you are diagnosed as Asperger's and you go there, you're told that's a false diagnosis. You just need to do the 12 steps and follow them, and they're going to help to get you straight. And here's my slide about individuals who are predators. This creepy person is now in jail. He was a divorce attorney, had to give up his license recently. He was using hypnosis on his female clients and raping them and then giving them amnesia to it. And this is a whole nother area of destructive mind control that is something that I've researched and have been helping people with. But regular, non-attorney predators, cult leaders, they have these same characteristics that I mentioned before. Someone was asking about an ex-spouse, I guess, an ex-husband or wife. And very narcissistic, no conscience, likes to manipulate other people, uses deception and exploitation, super charismatic, flattering, but the bottom line is, are they cutting you off from your family and friends, no matter what the story is? If the result is, don't talk to critics, don't talk to ex-members, don't read critical literature, follow what they say, where they threaten you or they make you feel guilty if you're not loyal to them. Warning, warning, warning. There are battered shelters if you're being physically abused or sexually abused. There's a website by a friend of mine who's a survivor herself of a narcissist. She has a website called LEFT-BRAiN. She's written a number of books on the subject. Her name is Donna Anderson. This is a very famous hierarchy of needs, Abraham Maslow, and it's very useful in terms of understanding how a predator or a cult person may try to enter into and manipulate and control someone. So if someone is kicked out of their house, for example, they have a fight with their parents, so they need food, they need shelter. So it'd be very easy for a pimp to pick them up and give them food and shelter before they start working on them to become an object for them and one of their employees. So it's just an interesting slide to consider. I'm sure you can look it up on the internet, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I also want to talk about situational vulnerabilities, and for parents and caretakers, people are especially vulnerable to mind controllers or undue influence cults when their parents are recently separated or divorced, or if they are in a very chaotic, disorganized home life with his alcohol, with his domestic violence, end of a relationship, death of a loved one, illness, change of law or loss of job or graduation, or moving to a new city, state, or country. For any human being, I've yet to meet the perfect family, or I've yet to meet anyone who didn't have a loss of a relative, or an illness, or knowing someone who has an illness, or graduation, or moving to a city, state, or country. And naturally, if you come from a war-torn country and you've had PTSD and traumatic experiences, you're going to be extremely vulnerable. But I can also point to the very beginning of the slide that there are some people who are very wanting to approval and wanting to please people. And there are other people who are very interested in magical thinking. They read a lot of books, fiction books that invoke a lot of magical thinking. And then there's a genetic component. Some people are what we call high hypnotizable. They have a very good ability to concentrate. They have a vivid imagination. And the thing is that's a good thing, but when you're in that state, your critical analytic faculties are offline, and it makes that person more susceptible to control. So, for example, in Scientology, they have a course called the Communications Course. But in essence, they're teaching people how to go into hypnotic trance and to become obedient. And that's a whole nother presentation about techniques of hypnosis. Any excessive amounts of hypnosis, meditation, altered states of consciousness activities can also render someone potentially more vulnerable if they don't understand what I presented in this program tonight. For example, if they don't have a frame for being able to analyze destructive undue influence. Learning challenges, including Asperger's, drug or alcohol issues, unresolved sexual identity or orientation, or rape or molestation, is also going to make people more personally vulnerable.
Charismatic authority is probably the most difficult to escape, as many of us may have experienced in our own dramatic and unhealthy love relationships, because it engages powerful emotional and biochemical reward systems that essentially turn the relationship with the cult into an addiction. Addiction as an adaptation to the felt sense of isolation, slowly influencing how we perceive and treat the burgeoning number of addicts, responding to the stress and loneliness of this left-shifted society. The adaptive nature of addiction, when the cage of the culture or cult creates a hyper-individualistic, hyper-competitive, frantic, crisis-ridden society that makes most people feel socially and culturally isolated. When charismatic authority is present in a group, members can become so physically and psychologically addicted to the drama, intensity, and hero worship that leaving the group can feel like leaving all meaning, all purpose, all love, and all hope behind. Regardless of its beliefs or its size, a cult is simply this. A cult is group or relationship that stifles individuality and critical thinking, requires intense commitment and obedience to a person and or an ideology, and restricts or eliminates personal autonomy in favor of the cult's worldview and the leader's wants and needs.
Struck that this is such a very reduced, not just reductionist, but actually a very reduced and very impoverished vision, which is actually destructive. I think it's not only untrue, but I think it's behind why we have destroyed the planet and why we're in the business of destroying society.
You know, I thought I was operating of my own free choice, but I wasn't. I thought I was thinking independently, I wasn't. And I was living in a bubble, a mind control bubble, and I needed ultimately help to exit that situation. That happened 2.5 years later for me. And so I want to just talk about a continuum of influence. I'll shoot ahead to this slide of constructive, healthy influence and destructive, unhealthy influence. For me, thinking about influence on a continuum makes just a lot of sense because everything about life is influence, it seems. But in terms of healthy influence, the respect for your individuality and your authentic being, and where there's love that's based on your beingness, as opposed to on the destructive side, a false identity that's in the image of the cult leader, and where love is conditional upon good performance, and that if you don't do what the leader tells you to do, bad things are going to happen to you. You'll never be a good person. On the healthy side, conscience is very, very respected, whereas on the destructive end of this influence continuum, the dogma or the doctrine is what is. On the healthy side, creativity, humor, again, individuality, free will, critical thinking. And on the destructive side, fear, guilt, dependency, obedience to this false self in the image of the leader. So this is my influence continuum slide. It's in the updated edition of my 1988 book called Combating Cult Mind Control. And there are 2 more slides that we made that are in the new edition. One for leaders and one for groups and relationships. And we'll cover the leaders next. And the healthy side, legitimate healthy leaders are healthy psychologically. They are human beings. They don't claim to be perfect. They don't claim to know everything. They know their own limits. They help to empower other people and individuals in their spheres. They're trustworthy. They're accountable. They're responsible. Whereas on the unhealthy continuum, people are very self-absorbed, narcissistic, psychopathic, very grandiose, elitist, wanting to control people, power hungry, secretive, deceptive, and basically say, I'm smarter than everyone, I know everything, and you need to just submit and obey. me. And on the influence continuum for groups and relationships, and when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about, on the unhealthy side, controlling relationships where a man takes over his partner or a woman takes over their partner and makes them dependent and obedient on them as an individual. But in terms of the healthy and the unhealthy continuum, the healthy continuum of groups allows checks and balances and also encourages informed consent so that you know what you're getting involved with. And there's checks and balances on power, where your individuality is respected, but there's also diversity. And what I mean by means creating the ends, I mean that in the healthy sphere, if you're doing good things in an ethical way, you're going to get a good result, as opposed to the dark side, where they often believe the ends justify the means. And yes, we need to lie and we need to trick and we need to steal, but later we'll have a beautiful, wonderful world or country. The healthy side encourages growth and most importantly, the freedom to leave a relationship or an organization. But on the other side, the destructive side, it's very authoritarian, very deceptive and manipulative. They really want to make people over in the image of the cult leader. They really just care about their own power and money and grandiosity, and there's never a legitimate reason to leave. And then we have the next slide is really talking about the difference between overt brainwashing versus the more subtle, sophisticated undue influence. And for me, for example, the kidnapping of Patricia Hearst, who was an heiress who was kidnapped out of her apartment, and she was put in a closet and raped and turned into Tanya of the cult group Simeonese Liberation Army. This was around the same time that I was recruited into the Mooney cult, by the way. That was a more clear example of overt brainwashing, where initially she didn't want to be kidnapped, she didn't want to be imprisoned or raped, but the compliance, what sometimes is referred to as Stockholm Syndrome, takes over. And it can also create false confessions and compliant behavior with overt brainwashing. Undue influence, though, the kind of experience I had, there really is the illusion of choice and the illusion of control, where you feel like things are voluntary, and that the new identity is created out of an evolution or a growth, but in fact it's manipulation. The next slide, really, I want to talk about the most important concept in social psychology. It's called the fundamental attribution error. And in my work for helping counsel people who've been involved with destructive cults and mind control, helping them to get better, in my work coaching family members and friends how to rescue a loved one who have undergone a radical personality change, I typically show different social psychology experiments, some videos of these experiments. For example, the Solomon Asch conformity study, or the Stanley Milgram obedience study, or the Philip Zimbardo prison study. And the essence of understanding the error that the world makes when they're trying to look at why is this human being doing what they're doing is they tend to over-attribute personal variables or personality variables, and they underestimate deception and social influence variables, contextual variables. So talking about myself, why did Steve Hassan drop out of Queens College and become a Mooney? Oh, he must have been looking for something, or he must have been weak, or he must have come from a bad family, or something wrong with Steve, which, at the end, the bottom of the slide, it talks about victim blaming. Instead of Steve was his girlfriend dumped him, and he was at this cafeteria at Queens College, and 3 women pretending to be students were flirting with him, love bombing him, and inviting him over for a free dinner, and lied to him and incrementally influenced him to get more and more involved and plant ideas in his head. So that's what fundamental attribution error is about. Another very important concept is cognitive dissonance theory. This is a picture of Leon Festinger, who wrote a very famous book called When Prophecies Fail in the 50s, about a UFO cult, actually, where the woman predicted that a spaceship was going to come to a particular mountain on a particular evening. And common sense would say that if the spaceship didn't show up, people would get disillusioned and leave the group. But he studied this group, and he saw that people actually believed more after going up to the mountainside as opposed to less. And so he created this theory saying that we basically have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and that if we change any one of the 3, the other 2 will shift to reduce dissonance. And if you can get someone to do an extreme behavior, like go up to a mountain top late at night, it's going to cause you to believe more in the reason for why you went up and feel passionate about it as well. So that's cognitive dissonance theory.
But the left hemisphere acts rather like the hemisphere. It thinks it knows what it doesn't know, and therefore excludes the vision and the knowledge and the wisdom that would have come from allowing the master, the right hemisphere, to have its say. Everything can be seen, as it were, through the lens of the left hemisphere and through the lens of the right hemisphere. So much as there is a sort of right hemisphere approach to the divine, which would be very hard to articulate in language, might be full of paradox, might be full of negatives, the so-called via negativa, or the apophatic path to truth, in which you can say what isn't the case better than you can say what is the case. So there's that. But the left hemisphere approach to religion would be very much cut and dried. There is a truth, it's black and white, and I know it, I'm in possession of it. It resides in the Holy Writ, it's written down, and nobody can question that because it's decontextualized now. It wasn't just written by a bunch of people 2,000 years ago, whatever it is. It is the divine word. There would be rules about how everything is to be done, and you would be one of the chosen few. So I think that there is that tendency in religion to answer questions, not necessarily by making people think it's unfair, say that they're seeking superiority, but it may be a reaction to insecurity, that it offers this sense of safety. And I think that's always a risk, that people will pursue what otherwise would be a good end in order to achieve a sort of personal security, and in some cases, I'm afraid, yes, a sort of narcissistic desire for being superior, in which they can tell other people what to do and how to talk, and they immediately are they're on their high horse and they are in the superior position, and everyone else is left trying to catch them up.
Sort of wearing the right robes and doing the right rituals somehow makes you wise.
Yes.
But it's just the accoutrements, it's just the externals.
Yes. So the point about the Pharisees was that they believed they were better than everyone else and they'd got it right. And they shunned other people because of that. Well, I think that's an unfortunate path to go down. In fact, to believe that you are right is always a mistake, and to hesitate and see the other side of a story is a very powerful recipe for wisdom and what is required to approach any kind of truth.
Is the notion that mind control creates this dissociative disorder, this split between your authentic self and the cult self. It doesn't erase who you are, and it just suppresses it. And if you've had the misfortune of being born into a destructive cult, even people born in cult groups still have an authentic self. It's just that they don't have the rich opportunity, environmental nurturance to develop themselves until after they get out of a destructive cult. It is about a very famous psychiatrist named Robert J. Lifton. He was an Air Force psychiatrist in the 50s, and he was studying Chinese communist brainwashing. And this is an updated edition of his initial book. And in this book, he talked about 8 criteria that any environment may be judged as a brainwashing environment. And in my deprogramming, and it was this book that was used by the ex-Moonies that were helping me to help me have a touchstone to answer the question, how would I know if I was under mind control? Because I didn't think I was under mind control at the time, as I mentioned, but
in some cults, every aspect of life is controlled, such that communication, education, diet, exercise, clothing, personal hygiene, sexual habits, and partners, healthcare, family planning, child rearing, and even friendships are monitored so that group members conform, are obedient, and eventually become isolated from any outside influencers. These systems of control dovetail with the overarching belief system of the group, and with each member's sense of dedication, such that each member may come to see their behaviors as perfectly logical choices that they made intentionally and willingly. This tends to create in each member a false sense of free will and free choice.
I was very willing to learn about Chinese communist brainwashing and Chinese communist mind control. So as they went through these 8 criteria, it became really obvious to me that the group that I was in, the Unification Church or the Unified Family, were doing all of these 8 things. Margaret Singer was an army psychologist in the 50s studying Chinese communist brainwashing, and I actually asked her to write the foreword to this edition that came out in 1988, and I included it in the new 2015 one. And as Lifton had his 8 criteria, Margaret Singer had her model for understanding a mind control group. And I'll just go through them quickly, but she talks about gaining control over a person's time and creating a sense of powerlessness, fear, and dependency in them, and using rewards and punishments to reinforce the cult desired behaviors and to punish the non-cult desired things, creating a total tightly controlled system of logic where you can't dissent, you can't ask questions and criticize it, and if you do, you're always made to feel like there's something wrong with you. And always keep people unaware and uninformed that there is an agenda to control them and change them. And she correctly says that total reform is impossible when a person is functioning at full capacity with informed consent. Based on Lifton's model is 8 criteria and Margaret Singer's, and based on the cognitive dissonance model of Leon Festinger, remember he talked about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I thought about thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and I added information control, and I created what is now referred to as the BITE model of mind control. So the B for the BITE model stands for behavior control. Now we're talking about specific things to be careful about. And if you go back to the earlier slide, the video of the continuum, which is on my website, I might add, and in my book as well, and on some blogs as well, you really want to be concerned the more a group wants to control your where you live, who you associate with, how you dress, what you eat and drink, your sleep, because a lot of cults like to use sleep deprivation, keeping people up late at night on computers, in chat rooms, on YouTubes, etc. They really want to control money. They really don't want you to have leisure time. They want to control all of your time. And of course also with whom and how you have sex. They want you to do cult rituals, especially religious/spiritual cults. Will have you chanting or praying or meditating for many, many hours, and to do it in such a way that makes you less able to be critical of the leader, the doctrine of the group. Unhealthy behavior control is where you have to ask permission for major life decisions, where you have to report thoughts and feelings, and there are these rigid rules and regulations. So with BITE model, and there's a much longer list, by the way, of the BITE model that's available for you. I just wanted to pick a few highlights for this course. But they really do use behavior modification. They really don't want you to be an individual. The key of behavior control is they want you to do what they tell you to do, period.
In effective groups, social and emotional bonds are developed and nurtured to create a sense of belonging and unity. These systems of influence help people learn that they fit in, that they share core beliefs, and that they are in sync with other group members. In healthy groups, this bonding tends to be positive and compassionate, but in cultic groups, this bonding serves to reduce independence and autonomy. Through persistent peer influence, various types of monitoring, rigid expectations, and constant social and emotional manipulation, cultic groups make sure that the needs of the group outweigh the needs, ideas, and dreams of individual members. For instance, highly dedicated cult members may shun or shame anyone who steps out of line, and openly suggest or insinuate that the wayward person's dedication is not what it should be.
So that's the behavior control of the BITE model. Information control. My assistant Abigail came up with this picture, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a cockroach inside of this ice cream sundae. And she grew up in the Mormon church, LDS, of Latter-day Saints. But this is a way of programming people inside the group not to, look at movies and other fun things because it's going to poison you. And it's got this horrible taint. So with information control, there's no informed consent. They don't tell you in the beginning who they are, what they believe, and what they're going to ask of you once you make a commitment to the organization. So people may say, I've joined this church or I've joined this group, but if you look at it from the outside, they didn't even know what they were joining. It was systematic manipulation and deception. Another thing with destructive cults is that whatever you say or do can be reported to the leadership in order to manipulate. So people have to turn in each other and spy on each other. There's extensive propaganda. The former members are terrible. Critics are terrible. Don't listen to them. It's spiritual pornography. No other critical points of view. And there's a distinct difference between what the inside believes and what they tell about their group's beliefs to the public. Information is the tool we use to think. So if we're operating in an information silo and we have an us versus them kind of mentality, we can get into a lot of trouble. The T of the BITE model is thought control. It's kind of black and white, us versus them, good, we're good, they're evil. Don't think negative thoughts, just believe magically and good things will happen. Loaded language is one of Lifton's 8 criteria. It talks about words that are jargon, that don't really mean anything to the average person, but within the cult, it has special meaning. So Scientology is one of the worst transgressors of loaded language. They literally have their own dictionaries of terms that Hubbard came up with. And members were taught that if you have a confusion or a doubt or you don't understand something or you even space out while you're reading something, it means you didn't understand the meaning of a particular word. And then you have to go and look up the word and self-indoctrinate. And of course, with thought control, you can't ask critical questions. You can't say, why is the leader sleeping with the followers? I thought he's supposed to be celibate. At all. You can't ask questions like that. And then the E of the BITE model is really about a combination of making you feel like you're chosen and you're special and you have unique knowledge to save the planet, where they may love bomb you and just effusive praise. Oh, you're so special. You're so wonderful. We love you. But once you're in the cult, there's so much manipulation of guilt and fear and fear of shunning, especially if you're born in a group and you're told that your family and friends will never be able to talk to you or relate to you if you leave the group. It's a horrible form of control. And the universal mind control technique is phobia indoctrination. The installation of irrational fears that terrible things will happen to you if you leave the group. So as someone who maybe has an elevator phobia, is afraid to get in an elevator, they can't imagine getting in an elevator, riding safely and comfortably. Someone in a mind control cult or relationship that's mind control, they can't imagine leaving the group or leaving the person and being happy and fulfilled.
Totalist groups, cults, totalitarianism, even controlling forms of domestic violence are set apart not by the fact of religion or ideology, but by the nature of the relationship between leader and follower, the relationship between the group and the follower. This is a relationship that is rooted in the creation of and experience of trauma. A helpful way to understand this relationship is by using attachment theory and trauma theory. Attachment researchers who study both child and adult relationships call this type of relationship one of disorganized attachment. This is a good book that explains disorganized attachment. Given the options of fight, flight, or freeze, the child's brain selects the latter as the least worst option, but the immediate solution of shutting down is now known to carry with it serious consequences. The motionless exterior is a facade, masking a complex biochemical and neurological process. On the outside, all seems calm, but on the inside there is turbulence. In the short to medium term, significant changes in the body's biochemistry take place when stress remains high and unregulated. This produces hormone imbalances, which in turn directly impede or alter neurological structures and connections. Toxic, unremitting stress literally changes the way the brain develops and the way the mind makes sense of relationships. In the long term, there is a significant risk of mental ill health resulting from the chronic struggle to form mutually satisfying relationships with others, emanating from a deeply distorted view of oneself as entirely unlovable and unworthy of affection. Because the brain is a pattern-recognizing organism, familiar and predictable pathways are always selected, even if they are sometimes not optimal for the child's development. Although the experience of fear without solution leads to profound changes in neurochemistry, the effects can be reversed. The effects of experiencing the persistent and chronic inability to find love and protection from a disconnected and neglectful caregiver or cult leader can be lasting and damaging, especially when a child is frightened by an abusive parent or cult leader. Persistently rejecting hostile, disconnected, or frightening attachment figures usually lead to the development of an internal working model based upon an expectation that others are similarly unavailable or unpredictable. Regardless of its beliefs or its size, a cult is simply this. A cult is group or a relationship that stifles individuality and critical thinking, requires intense commitment and obedience to a person and or an ideology, and restricts or eliminates personal autonomy in favor of the cult's worldview and the leader's wants and needs. A cult is not simply a new religion, nor is any religion necessarily an old cult. In fact, the two may have nothing to do with one another. This mistaken connection between religions and cults is one of the reasons that so many cults are able to gather followers even today. Why? Because if people mistakenly believe that cults are always based on religious beliefs, then they'll be on alert for and possibly protected from only one kind of cult, and they'll be dangerously unaware of all the rest. Some cults may promote religious beliefs, while others may promote political change, racist beliefs, psychotherapeutic approaches, meditation, terrorism, revolution, esoteric philosophies, sexual freedom, celibacy, polygamy, spiritual enlightenment, New Age, metaphysical and/or psychic beliefs, nutrition and dietary regimens, improved health or wealth, addiction, recovery, self-actualization, yoga, belief in UFOs and extraterrestrial life, martial arts, management and leadership courses, communication techniques, and even multi-marketing.
A political cult, not a religious cult, because they want to take over the world and they want to impose their version of Sharia law on everybody else. Joseph Kony, an African cult leader, would go into villages and kidnap children and kill their parents and recruit them to be child soldiers. Of course, the right picture is the head of North Korea. They talk about commercial cults. This image in the left is actually a book that was written and published by a pimp, and Pimping Ken, and it's how to brainwash people to be your sex slave. It's very, very upsetting. And it's really a horrendous abuse. I can also tell you that with three other people, three survivors of sex trafficking, we've developed a curriculum, a first of its kind curriculum called Ending the Game. The website is endingthegame.com. A 10-session course to help people who were trafficked to understand mind control techniques that pimps use to empower and enslave people, change their name, change their clothing, change their language. In the case of pimps, they'll often use threats and beatings and drugs and threaten to kill your family and other types of extreme coercion. That's how millions of people, unfortunately, around the world are victims of trafficking. And then the other thing I want to comment about commercial cults, so this slide is Herbalife. I could have used Amway. I could have used any number of hundreds of groups. They're pyramid schemes where they make these deceptive come-on recruitment things that you can make millions of dollars in part-time effort, selling vitamins or selling water or selling something, but it's actually recruiting people. And the idea there, people are told, is that you'll get a percentage of everything that the people that you bring in sell. But it's really a fraud, and except for a very tiny percentage of people at the very top of the pyramid, everybody loses money. But it functions like a destructive cult in that they program the new independent salesperson to listen to tapes, read books, attend conferences to become a great salesperson. But a lot of it is utilizing hypnosis and NLP and mind control that gets people to believe that the problem is in them if they're not making $1 million. I highly recommend Pyramid Scheme Alert as a website. We're actually working on a blog for freedomofmind.com about a new movie that's coming out about multi-level marketing. I think it's called Betting on Zero. So then I want to just talk for a minute about pseudotherapy cults, larger awareness, group awareness trainings. These can be anything from live-in psychology cults where everything is controlled. A Center of Feeling Therapy, the Sullivanians comes to mind with this category. Then there are groups like Landmark Forum, LifeSpring Insight trainings, where they get people together for a weekend or for a series of days, and they do all kinds of BITE, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, to take people over and indoctrinate them. And one of the more pernicious beliefs that are installed in some of the large group training programs is the idea that you are God and you create your own reality. So there's no science, there's no objective reality, but it's all a manifestation of your mind. And they also say that there's no such thing as a victim. So that if you were raped, you are made to think, why did I need to create this experience for myself to be raped? As opposed to, I was taken advantage of by somebody who did something to me that I didn't want them to do. So it's a very convoluted belief system that short circuits normal, rational, critical thinking. I can also tell you I've worked with some people who went into therapy, and 20 years later they're still with that therapist and they're not any better. And as a therapist, I say the purpose of therapy is to get out of therapy and to be functional and to live your life and to be able to do meaningful work and have meaningful relationships and make a difference. And as opposed to unethical therapists who might sleep with their clients or, just bilk them for huge amounts of money or isolate them from family or friends. That's a horrible thing. So now we get to the slides about Asperger's. I met with Tony Atwood when he was doing the last one-day conference for ANE at MIT, and he really encouraged me to do this webinar and talked about his concerns, especially for people who are Asperger's, to be recruited into terrorist-type groups, because there's a certain attractiveness with the love bombing, instant friendship, instant meaning. God has a plan for you. And the last sentence of this slide is just that it can be very confusing for family members and friends when they see someone who's on the spectrum and all of a sudden they say that they're happy for the first time, or they've made friends for the first time, or now they know the purpose of their life for the first time, and is a real desire not to want to take away that happiness or interfere, because the person is so enthused. But warning, because this is a horrible, non-healthy place for people. I have recently been in contact with a man who is involved with a Bible cult, the International Churches of Christ, for 24 years, and he was undiagnosed as Asperger's. And he read my book and he reached out to me and such. And again, his family didn't, took his word for it when he said he was happy. And his family didn't understand that the cult had programmed him never to tell the outside world anything bad about his experiences. So he didn't tell his family about breaking sessions. He didn't tell anyone about the extreme amount of abuse, loneliness, phobia programming, etc. So it took him a really long time to wake up, but he finally did, which is the good news.